Bam.
This is Mike Barth, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, Mike's come on the show. My buddy Dave, who's down below me down here, he works at the Irvine Nature Conservancy. I hope I said that right. And I love talking to Dave about nature and plants and animals and all of the things that, look, frankly, we take it for granted, right? And wild spaces and and all of these things. So I thought it'd be great to have someone like you on, Mike, to continue the conversation when we think about conservation, preservation, all of these different aspects of it. And then as soon as you jump into one system and start talking about what needs to happen, you realize there are many competing systems that need energy and protect. And it gets a little crazy. How do you wrap your head around what the prioritization of wild stuff and what goes first? How do you even do that with all the different people that have a say in what happens?
I think what it comes down to, what I've learned is that, everything is connected, and we as humans, we're another species on this planet, and we're connected to everything else in the system out there. And there's a lot of other things out there that, need space to live. And basically that we call that, as ecologists, we call that their habitat. And that's what it comes down to. If they don't have that, they can't exist. And it's same for us. We need our space too. But I've just learned that we, as stewards of this planet, we need to share it responsibly with the other species out there, including plants and animals. So that's my take on it.
Dave, your take?
It is a hard thing to wrap your mind around, and I think what kind of happens is over time has been reactionary by humans based on what the humans have been doing, and most of that is the human population growing, development coming in, all the kind of reaching out into these areas that used to be native or natural and altering those things, and then like in each one of these areas that we work in, there obviously are triggers from these human behaviors that then start throwing particular species into the forefront, or even particular habitats or ecosystems, and that's over the years, that's kind of changed a lot, where it is more focused on the whole habitat or the whole ecosystem that's there, because then you capture multiple species within that. And so it's really, it's kind of the same situation around the world, but you have different species that come to the forefront, while you're doing it, depending on what's happening in your region. So,
and I think we call those iconic or umbrella species, because if you can protect that species and all of its habitat, you end up protecting lots of other things that live alongside and amongst that particular critter or plant. And so I guess that's what happens. And some things, get the money. So fuzzy things, like a good example over here is the koala. The koala is a very iconic Australian animal. It's endangered, and it gets a lot of funding through both government and non-profits that get donations to protect them. But in doing so, it's protecting a lot of habitat gets set aside as sanctuaries or national parks, and that ends up protecting lots of other things.
Yeah, it's funny too, like the threats are constantly changing to these ecosystems and the particular species in them. And for a long time it was human habitation, human development, but now with the whole climate change stuff that's going on, you're seeing like massive wildfires that just are annihilating places, and it theoretically that's human cause, because the trigger factors, the scientific trigger factors are coming from the human race and the way we're managing the world. But it's the changes happen, and they happen all the time, and it's an ever evolving kind of job, and paying attention to what's going on and how these things are. Even ecosystems will like, if you got global warming going on, ecosystems, a whole ecosystem can start moving. It'll start shifting, going north or not, or it'll die, right? So it's just interesting to see all these things change over time, and the fact that change is constant, you know.
And if you look back in Earth's time, it's happened many times before too. So we've, the Earth experiences ice ages. It's happened. It's gone through, asteroid slamming into it and causing mass extinctions in the past. So it's nothing new for the planet, but this time it looks like one species, us, is triggering, all these events. And so that's a first for this. And I guess it's hard to explain that because we just go about our lives and do our thing, and we don't feel like we're having an impact. But I guess cumulatively, with however many billion people are on the planet, we are having an effect. Whether we like it.
Are we good at managing wild spaces? Or are we still like in the infancy of this science of trying to? I recall like when we were all kids, Mount St. Helens blew up, and I think it was Weyerhaeuser. Somebody's like, "Hey, we're going to leave this hunk of forest to nature, and we're going to battle them in our hunk of forest," and we got our asses kicked. Like nature just completely stomped us. Now, look, this is 40 years ago, right? So maybe we're better. So I guess my question is are we better at managing something as big as an ecosystem?
You know what? I ask myself that all the time because I think we're in the infancy. We're learning about it, and we don't quite, even as ecologists, it's kind of a new science, really. We're trying to understand all those connections and how, if you tinker with one thing in that ecosystem, it creates this ripple effect and causes effects down the line. There's a good example out there. It's very well known in ecology now about the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone and how that's transformed that ecosystem. So without that apex predator, you had way more deer and elk than ever before. And then with the wolves coming back, that changed everything. The landscape changed back to apparently what it was, and it's just a healthier ecosystem now, apparently.
It's funny too, because like a lot of that was, you have too many deer, too many elk, and they start eating all the vegetation, and they start eroding the sides of the creek beds because they're trampling it, they're eating all that. Then it affects the fish and the water quality and all that kind of, so it just has this, and it's not immediate, but it's like this ripple effect that continues to occur. And the other part about it being a new science, I mean, we're still discovering things like mycorrhizae and mycelium, and you have these living networks in the soil that are actually allowing trees to communicate with each other and transfer nutrients between each other and going over vast areas. And that, I think that all that new science that's coming and the new discoveries of this and learning about how each one of these organisms are really critical to everything that's there, and that, I think that's been new stuff that's come out over time that really helps understand that we're talking about something that is super diverse and super complex and is ever moving and changing and growing. And I think that that's really important to understand that. And people, unfortunately, I think humans have a lot of humans have very shallow viewpoints of what nature is and what it requires. How did it get there in the first place? And then you come in, you're like, oh, I'll just do this. Who cares? Or let's cut down all the trees. It'll be fine. We need some wood. It's not a sustainable thought process for a species like humans to exist on Earth long term, you know?
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot of people that are just, I guess, have disconnected from the natural world in a way, and you know, they experience it through maybe their screen, you know, their television. They see watch docos and stuff, and that's great. But to get out into it is something totally different. You know, to be immersed in nature and actually hear and feel and see what's around you out there. So I don't know. I encourage people to get out there and do that. Whether it's even just a park by your house. You know, Dave and I grew up in coastal Orange County, and we that was our mission, to find wild places, as wild as they could get, and be out there and watch. We were obsessed with birds of prey at the time, you know, as young teenagers, and we would go out and try to photograph them. And it was way better than Netflix or telly.
We used to feed them.
Actually doing something and being a part of what was out there. Yeah, I don't know. I'll never forget that, and that really inspired those times inspired me to do what I do now, to get into my career. And like I was always curious as a kid about, you know, what's in my backyard, what spider is that, what bug is that, and like I think parents need to allow their children to get out there, and don't be scared of nature. You know, it's not scary. It's beautiful. It's a good thing.
Funny. I agree with you. And you know, here in Orange County, we have, you know, a lot of rattlesnakes, right? And people are like, you know, oh my gosh, there's a rattlesnake, and the instant fear, right? They're like, it's gonna come and try to eat me. And I'm standing there looking at it, going, check it out. Like, and they're like, what are you doing? I go, I'm looking at it. You know, it's not like attacking me. No. It's like a couple feet away from me, and I'm like, check it out. Look at this. And look at this. And then all of a sudden they're like, I thought that thing would come over and eat me, you know? And it's like, no, you know, that type of stuff is pretty rare. Maybe a little Hollywood involved there about, you know, giant monster animals trying to eat you. Not that it can't happen, but you know, we live with these things all the time. You go up in, you know, up north of LA, and they have bears in their neighborhoods regularly, and they're always there. They're always here, you know,
in the mountains. I worked with the Condors for 8 years in the mountains in California, and regularly around black bears, and often seeing the paw prints of mountain lions, you know, that were probably watching me the whole time, but you rarely ever see them. They don't if they don't want to be seen, they'll be hidden somewhere.
So Pete, just so Mike did the Condor program for 8 years, and I'd go visit him, and I'd go help out and all kinds of stuff. And we were up there one time in Sespe National Forest, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would get stillborn calves. They would get them frozen in the back of the truck, and we're up there getting ready to, you know, put one of these calves out to feed the condors when they first were being re-released in California. And a bear came over, picked up the calf out of the back of the truck, and ran away with it. You know, we're like, what?
Give that back. Stop. Wait. Keep running.
Keep the bushes with a big cow, you know.
I don't know how many times that happened where I dragged, you know, carried this thing on a backpack way out into the like on out to like a plateau or a meadow, and then plopped it out we did it at night, so the condors never saw us putting the food out, and then turn around and I see a bear walking up, you know, thanks for that.
I've noticed one of the things that is challenging. We tend to get very passionate about whatever our thing is, whether it's people should be riding their bikes more or whatever the thing is, and it becomes a zero-sum game where you have to stop driving your car. You drive a car, you have car brain, and it's like, oh, come on. We have a lot of systems that we use to move around. The U.S., oddly enough, has the most rail of any nation. So let's calm down for a second and let's try to build consensus and include people. We also have so much competition for this existential crisis and that existential crisis. I get it. We're on the edge of survival, right? It's us against infinity. But how do we get better than that so that, nature is something that we can just forget about and a lot of people don't even consume it, right? How do we get better at including more people into the process of maybe giving a little bit of a damn or a little bit of money, or understanding that we do have to suffer some inconvenience to preserve something, or just even give it any attention at all? How do we do that without just making everything you either love this or you're a fucking asshole?
I think we need our governments and politicians to be on board too, because if they're not talking about it and promoting that kind of thing, I don't think it's gonna, or creating policies to do these things to help preserve nature and threatened species and stuff. Like it doesn't happen that easily. It's like it's always the NGOs that are going to have to battle for a bit of funding and scrape the barrel to make these things happen. But there has been a lot of good done. A lot of national parks and wildlife refuges in America. They're there for a reason. They're created. Or it's got a long history, and same with Australia where I'm at now. There's and that was the reasoning for those places, to give nature, space, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I've got this theory that with everything happening around the world and development and deforestation, it's like humans we have this environmental debt to what I call Mother Nature, and it's accumulating, and at some stage Mother Nature is going to collect on that debt. And that's Mount St. Helens was kind of like an example of that. There's nothing we can do about that. It's gonna something is going to happen that we can't control. We like to think we're in control, but the earth and geologic time, we're just a little speck. So
it's funny because I refer to humans as one of the most invasive species to ever exist on the planet.
we're all guilty though,
We are.
I'm not above that. Like I fly in airplanes, I drive a car, I drink coffee, and so I would love to have a solution. But I don't know. I guess awareness for one, and
I think
a little compassion for other things out there that besides humans. Yeah.
I think the next generations too. We have to. There has to be continual exposure and education and participation of the generations below our generation. I think you had the environmental movement that came out, and you had all this stuff that happened that really kind of threw the environmental stuff into the forefront, but that also came with like a certain generation that really carried that and pushed that, and we've kind of put limits on like you have to enjoy this or you have to appreciate this in this particular way. And that may not fit with some of the new generation now, where they need to be able to experience it and appreciate it that's meaningful to them, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't necessarily have to be told what that is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty important. I think if you look at the younger generation, like both Mike and I have children. Mine are a little older than Mike's children, but they are very environmental minded, and they have been raised with being environmentally conscious and recycling and all that kind of stuff. But they have a different, even, I mean, both our kids were raised going out into nature and doing these things, and they do have an appreciation for it, but it's also different than I think it was for us. And they just have a different perspective of it. And I think that that's important. The other thing that is kind of in the conservation community, it needs to be more diverse all over the world. And I'm talking about like cultural and ethnic diversity. It tends to be very much a white person thing, which is unfortunate. And ideally it'd be nice in the future generations that you actually have many multicultures coming into the world of conservation and supporting it and that kind of stuff. So I think that's stuff that needs to happen around the world. And, you know, ironically, from an ecological standpoint, ecosystems stronger with the more biodiversity it has. You know, it's more resilient. And yet, you know, a lot of the people working in conservation we're all kind of the same. So it'd be nice to diversify that, you know.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Mike in particular and maybe his career path. You know, he mentioned the Condors, but Mike's done a lot of stuff in a bunch of different things, and maybe share a couple of you know, how'd you get into the Condors? Right? Okay, wait, let's go. You went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, right?
Yeah.
You got a degree in wildlife management, if I recall.
Ecology and wildlife biology.
Okay. And then when you graduated, how did you end up with U.S. Fish and Wildlife at the Condor program?
Well, that's a funny story because San Luis Obispo happened to hold every year the California Festival of Beers.
I was there.
Which I was a big fan of. And so the year that I was graduating, I ran into a friend of mine that had graduated 2 years previously. And over a beer, we were talking about what we were doing and what our plans were. And he said that he was working with Condors. And I just asked him, oh, do you need a hand? And he said, yeah, can you be there on Monday? I showed up on Monday just as a volunteer, basically, and then that led eventually to an 8-year stint, and being the supervisor of the whole release program in Southern California. So, yeah, it's funny how things can happen like that, and that's the way. I don't know. Nothing surprises me anymore, in life. Seems to take these little twists and turns based on sometimes just chance.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to know what you're doing and be confident too. But it's happened a lot to me over my career. Just these little moments in time that lead to some new adventure.
Well, and I think it's because you're paying attention, right? Like when this thing presents itself, you're like, oh, hey, I could do something with that, you know?
Yeah.
I've experienced that as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So, yeah, your career has been amazing. I've watched you go from the start to where you are now, and it's oh man. It's a wild ride.
It is a wild ride.
Yeah.
When you were finishing up at San Luis Obispo, did you have raptors and condors, such that kind of thing? Was that pegged for you, or did that just work out serendipitously over a beer?
Yeah. So in uni, I volunteered and monitored several peregrine falcon nests that were along the Central California coast. So I did that just because peregrine falcons are just kind of one of my favorite birds in the world, and so I just felt obliged and honored to see them and, you know, up close and in person, watching their nests. And then I ended up doing, for my kind of my honors thesis thing at school, I surveyed for red-shouldered hawks around San Luis Obispo County. So birds of prey were my passion. And actually before the condors, my first job was I helped release 4 captive raised peregrine falcons up in the wilderness in northeastern Oregon. So that was like a Oh, it's a dream job. It was like a paid holiday for 3 months up there.
So that you lived out in the woods
Yeah,
with a hack box on a
yeah,
cliff face, right? Of
yeah,
baby peregrines, and you were feeding them and taking care of them until they flew away.
yeah. I was their unseen. I was their unseen parent. So every morning, early morning, I would hike up and put out frozen quails on the cliff ledge, and that so that they had something to eat every day while they learned. They basically had to learn how to fly and feed themselves over the next 2 months.
If I recall right, I think you became a firefighter as well.
Not intentionally, but yeah, we had a dry lightning storm start a fire between where I was camped and the release cliff. So yeah, I watched that go from a single tree that the lightning hit, where it broke the top of the tree off, and I put the fire out on the ground, but it was still burning up in the tree. So I watched it go from a single tree to about 2 weeks later, it was 20,000 acre wildfire.
Wow,
Yeah,
crazy.
that's great. That is crazy. Yeah. And what took you to Australia? That's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, so while I was working with the Condors, we used to have 3-month international internships, and one of the young ladies that was interning on the program ended up, yeah, we started a relationship, and she was from Australia, and we had a back and forth thing for a year or so, and then she came to America, lived there for nearly 5 years, and then at that time I was ready for a change, and she was homesick for Australia, and she convinced me to go to Australia, and I thought, wow, this sounds like a good adventure. But I had no idea at the time that 20 years later I would still be here.
Yeah. I get the
So
impression with Australia that the middle is all this wild space, but is that true? And is how do you guys protect your wild spaces out there? I mean, a lot of the United States is a national park, a national grassland, a state something. I mean, we do a pretty good job of that, but you guys have just so much open area. How is that? And there's also indigenous people out there too.
Yeah. So the reason most of that's not inhabited out there is because it's harsh. It's an arid zone out there, like desert or very dry. So most Australians live somewhere on the coast around Australia, and that's where you get all the big cities are all on the coast. So, but we do have large protected areas of national park, and those desert areas. We have indigenous protected areas and indigenous lands as well, scattered around Australia, that are managed by the First Nations people here. So it's it's an interesting place to live. I've lived in how many, like 5 different states now in the 20 years I've been here. So I've seen quite a bit of Australia so far. Not so much the northern part though, and just as well because I can't handle the tropical humidity.
understandable.
Yeah.
So when he left the Condor program and his became his wife, they actually traveled across the United States before moving to Australia, volunteering for conservation work for like stints of time. And I don't know, I think it was a year or more. You both of you did that.
Yeah, we took a year off and we drove from California across to the very southern tip of Florida, and then we volunteered with some friends doing some migratory bird banding down in the Caribbean for a couple months. And then when we got back to Florida, we drove from the southern tip of Florida basically to Alaska. And we drove back and followed the Rocky Mountains from New Mexico all the way through America and Canada, and then up to Alaska to the Seward Peninsula. So it was about as far as you could drive on the North American continent. It was an amazing year though, and yeah, we spent 5 months up in Alaska, working with the Forest Service, I did mostly bird surveys up there. But yeah, that was a whole nother level of, danger. being around moose and actual brown bears. Yeah, that was interesting.
So you talk danger. Tell us a little bit about your great white shark tagging off of San Francisco.
Oh, man. Yeah, that was pretty wild. That was the grand finale of that year. After we got back from Alaska, we met up with some friends that they're wildlife researchers that were working out on the Farallon Islands off of right off San Francisco, basically, but it's about 20 miles out and right on the continental shelf. It's tiny little rocky islands. They get thousands and thousands of seals that haul up and have their pups on the island. And every year, around October, November, and that's when we were there, the biggest of the big great whites come around to feed on the mainly the elephant seal pups. And so that year was the first year that we had a researcher come, and he had some satellite tags that he wanted to attach to these giant great whites. So every day we would take turns and go up to the lighthouse up on the top of the little island and scan for shark attacks. So you could see birds diving and a big blood stain in the water and thrashing around going on. And so we would report that in on our little radio, and everyone else, there were only 5 of us on the island, everyone else would run down to the boat landing, drop the little 18-foot boat in the water, race out to the spot and try to get close to the great white while it was munching on a seal on the surface, and jab this tag in. And one of these things, we pulled up to it, and it was sitting there having a munch on the surface. Solid red water that we drift into. This thing was longer than our boat, and our boat was 18 feet long. And it was it was wider than our boat too. That's what freaked me out. It was literally like approaching a real life Jaws.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Are we really going to do this?" To my friend Adam, and he was like, "Yeah, man, we're going to tag it up to next to it." And we're side by side with it now, and it's just oblivious to it.
Oh,
yeah, Mike got locked up. So that's a funny thing. So I was reading a book about this northern polar expedition that gets beset in ice, and there are big things to eat out there. Obviously polar bears are competing with you, but you can eat a polar bear if you dare to take it on, right?
Yeah,
and walrus and the big sea lions and all those. You don't realize how dangerous those things are, because we don't really ever think of them as predator or prey or something that's dangerous. We just look at them and go, "Hey, there they are." But if you're next to one and it wants to fuck you up, that's it. Like it's just going to be over.
And a lot of them are giant, like Mike was saying about the boat, and the shark they're going to tag is bigger than the boat they're in, and the thing's like thrashing and doing this, and he's hitting the boat that they're in.
Yeah.
Mike's done some crazy stuff. He's typical. Like he'll send me photos, and he's like, "I'm at work today, and here's a photo of a glossy black cockatoo nest that he's trying to save," and then there'll be a next photo from him, and there's a lace monitor trying to climb up the tree to eat the babies he's trying to protect. And then he like sends me another photo, and there's like a tiger snake curled up, 5 feet away from him, which is the most deadliest snake in the world. He's just like, oh, I'm just at work today,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Sorry, I dropped out there.
That's all right. Yeah, we were just talking about the size of animals. I read a book about a polar expedition that gets beset in ice, and you think you can just like kill a seal or something. I mean, Nanook of the North. You ever see that movie? That guy's literally like throwing a hunk of meat on a hook and then just hanging on until the seal gets tired, right? But when you get around walrus and sea lions, those things are gigantic and way more spry than you think, and they can absolutely you don't want to get near one because it will kill you. It will absolutely kill you if you get too close to it.
Yeah. They knock people right off of the ice shelves and ice floes and stuff. They're nasty creatures apparently.
Yeah.
But
So Mike, like what out of all the different things you've done over your career, like what holds the most special for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the Condors were amazing because once you watch them closely enough, you realize that every single bird had its own distinct personality, and it really taught me something about kind of all animals, that if you watch anything closely enough, they do all have their individual patterns. It might not be, what we think of as like I don't know. They just have their own ways of doing things, and that's how animals, I think, evolve and change and learn. Is like one animal amongst thousands or hundreds of thousands might do something slightly different but better than all the other ones, and then it breeds and passes that on. And that's what evolution, I guess, is it's about learning and passing knowledge on. And the condors, it was amazing because we were doing something totally off the books, like putting out these condor long-lived species. They needed their parents. They didn't have parents. There was no wild birds out there when we did that. So we were their unseen parents, trying to provide food and kind of guide them in the right direction. But they had to learn everything by trial and error. And it was hard to watch sometimes because sometimes they died doing that. But in the end, once they reached maturity, which for them was like 7 years, 7 years old, then their focus was on breeding and finding a mate and nesting, and it changed everything. And so now you got hundreds of birds in the wild, lots of nests every year. It's a whole new game out there now, and it was an expensive program, but I still think it's worth it. And yeah.
But condors are still critically threatened too, right? So is that just because it takes a while to get out of that next phase and get to another phase?
Yeah, their main threat really is still secondary lead poisoning. So they are scavengers, and if they eat an animal that's got any lead from bullet fragments or pellets in it, it brings them down quite quickly. So in California, they've passed a bill that was ages ago, banning the use of lead bullets for big game hunting in the Condor range. So now you have to use something non-lead. I think most people use copper now, and that's made a difference. But you can't. It's hard to police that, and there's a lot of private land out there that people can probably just do whatever they want and still use lead. And lead's bad just in general. Lead is toxic to everything, including us.
Right.
So, I mean, if there's an alternative, I think we should be using it when possible. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny too. The condors, here's the condor range. Condors don't know that. Condors like, oh, I'm going to go over here today. Later. It happened all the time. I remember you guys you'd be chasing them, halfway across the state, and they just decide, okay, I'm curious, I'm going that way.
They all had like VHF radio transmitters on them, and like a numbered wing tag, so we knew who they were. And I remember one time one disappeared, and it was about, I don't know, maybe almost a month later, we got a call from Department of Fish and Game that this condor was hanging around a campground up in Bishop, and we were down in, Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, and this thing turns up on the other side of the Sierra Nevada range, and I went up there and ended up, it was coming down, and I think people were trying to feed it, so I ended up using a rifle cannon net and caught it on the ground, like trying to come into the campground, and I transported it back down to Santa Barbara Mountains and back with its cohort, and everything was fine after that. But yeah, it just showed like they could fly wherever they wanted, and I could literally have one get up in an air current in front of me, spiral up on a thermal, and this thing's got a 9-foot wingspan, and it would go so high in the sky that even with my binoculars, it would be a speck in the sky. So I don't know how many thousands of feet up they were going, but they would do that, and we would call it specking out. And then they would just pick a direction and glide in a straight line, like they could go like 100 miles.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, like an airplane, basically.
When you shoot a net and you grab a condor, I mean, you're not driving a Pinto. What kind of
that was my job.
How do you transport? Yeah.
And when you grab them, it's not they don't have talons like an eagle or something. Their claws on their feet are more like a dog's toenails or something. So you got to worry about their beak. That beak. Yeah. It's designed to tear hunks of flesh, and that's exactly what we'll do if it grabs hold of you. And I got scars on my arms from that. I've seen people almost lose fingers by not, you just got to get control of its head and beak, and
and then they got these 9-foot wings that they're doing this with, I remember
how tall is the body of a condor? I mean, like a 9-foot wingspan requires a lot of breast meat, to control that thing.
They weigh about 10, 12 pounds or something. No, I think it's more than that. I'm thinking kilos. Yeah, they're like 18 to 20 pounds.
Yeah,
wow. And so you get control of the head, and you gotta wrap them up so their wings are in, so they're not flapping all over the place, and we put them in basically big like dog carriers.
I remember the one time we were up in Los Padres, I think, and you had them in a kennel, individually in these big kennels, and what the job of the day was we needed to do x-rays of them in the field to see if they were ingesting lead fragments. And I remember everyone standing around the kennel and said, all right, who's going in first?
That was the scariest thing about that, is that getting one out, because it's basically cornered in there, and you gotta reach in and try to grab it without losing fingers.
And I've jumped on many big things in my life, and I think even that one I was like, nah, man, you guys do this.
You guys are getting paid to do this, and you weren't.
I was volunteering. I wasn't getting paid. So.
That's way above your pay grade.
You were talking, Mike, about being still so you can see things. When Dave and I camp up in the Bishop area, and and you sit there and you just kind of meditate on one, all the plants around you are alive. They're fluttering in the breeze, and they're doing all the things that they do to make their space more habitable for themselves, the creatures around them. They're all working in concert. And then you look at a mountain, you think there's nothing going on in that mountain, but in reality, there's a zillion things happening. You see the same exercise in Afghanistan. You just stare at a mountain, and there's heather and rocks, and you think that's all there is. And really, and really, in a lot of ways, that is all there is, except for when you really slow down and you zoom in, it's alive, the whole place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even I know, like, I find deserts fascinating because they look like there's not much life out there, but in reality, go out there at night, and there will be a lot of things, nocturnal critters that come out at night that you don't see during the day, especially the heat of the day. And most places are like that. There's things, if you look close enough, there's living things everywhere. And I guess, that's a good example. Like what you said, a mountain is full of life for sure.
Right. And some things cycle, like, the bear won't come out until later on. And once the bear leaves, it's like when our cat goes in our backyard, all the birds and all the different levels start singing, and like, oh, okay, hey, there's a cat in the backyard. And it can be parrots and hawks and all kinds of birds. And so there's a whole reaction in that space, but you have to sit still and allow that space to do what it does. At least that's Pete's impression of it. I'm not an ecologist.
No, I get you. I'm the same. It's like if I hear a bunch of birds chattering or making alarm calls, then there's always something cool there. It could be that could be a snake, bird, some sort of bird of prey, or an owl or something that's like triggering him to go off like that. So that makes me curious every time I hear that outside. I'm like, what is that out there? Because it's going to be something good.
And what's funny about that? It's like you speak the language of nature, because you know what's happening just by sound. You can be like, there's something going on right there, and I need to look,
Yeah.
And I think we've been doing that our whole lives because we've always been chasing nature,
Yeah. And that's what all the other animals out there do. They want to know. They want to know where the predator is, because if they know where it is, it helps them avoid it. Like it's the unseen that's like the biggest threat for them.
Yeah. Which is super cool.
And a lot of times it's the bird-to-bird communication, where they're trying to sort out. I think about this as a military thing, like what's above me? Okay, we have the Raven drone that's going to fly around. Above that's another drone. Oh, there's a Black Hawk going to fly through the area. Above that. So you look at the birds, and they're stacked, right? The parrots don't really ever land in one area very long. They eat something, they rest, and then they're gone. So they're just like super transitory. The hawk is around for a couple of days, and then is gone. But they have a rotation. They have altitude separation as well.
Yeah, I've noticed. Oops, sorry, Dave.
Go ahead.
I've noticed with watching glossy black cockatoos, one of the threatened species I work with right now over here. When I've watched nests a couple times now, I've seen where a wedge-tailed eagle, it's like very similar to a golden eagle over here, comes strafing in just over the canopy above the nest. And I think what it was doing was seeing if there's any new fledglings that are clumsy and vulnerable that it can pick off. But the adult birds, the glossy black cockatoos, would go up and they would get above the eagle as a group. So maybe 10, 12 of them, and start harassing it from above. But so they were safe as long as they're above it. And that's their strategy. So when the eagle flew up higher, they would go higher. They would stay above it. So they were safe, and they could swoop down on it if they wanted to. But they knew they were safe as long as they were above. So it was that elevational kind of security, just like the drones. And you don't want to be underneath the predator.
No.
No. Yeah.
So tell me, you lived on Kangaroo Island.
Yeah, for 12 years.
Yeah. Which is, it's like a international registry, right, of like conservation places. Tell Tell us what were you doing on Kangaroo Island? How long were you there?
That's how I started getting into this glossy black cockatoo recovery work. I ended up landing a job there as the project officer for that recovery program. And Kangaroo Island is, what is it? It's the third largest island off the Australian coast. And it sits down kind of in the middle of the south coast of Australia, up near Adelaide. And it's unique in that it does not have the introduced red fox, and it doesn't have rabbits. So anything out there that small mammals, things that live and nest on the ground, they do really well there compared to the mainland, where there's more threat from predation. So yeah, it's a mecca for all kinds of different wildlife. And yeah, it's got some really big wild spaces and national parks on there, plus amazing coastline and diversity, both in the water and on the land. Yeah, it's just an incredible place to live. You know, it's isolated, but it's close enough. It's close enough to the mainland that you could be in Adelaide, you know, in a few hours if you wanted to get to the city or whatever. But it's got that water barrier, so if you want to go there, you got to either short half-hour flight from Adelaide or a 45-minute ferry trip across from the mainland. But beautiful place. If you like tiger snakes, yeah, go there this time of year in spring, like the first warm days in spring. Oh my God, they're everywhere. Like black tiger snakes.
The most deadliest snake in the world.
Yeah.
just
They're
put that in
beautiful.
perspective.
Beautiful. They pop up like a cobra when they're upset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. The places like that, Kangaroo Island, and I'm thinking about way up north, there's a place called Wrangel Island. You know, just wild disparities in where it is and how hard it is to live there. There's nothing on Wrangel Island, right? But there is some scientists who's desperate to get there. And like, I just need another $2 million and I'll be up there for 6 months. I'll do a rotation. I'll come back. I'll describe, you know, we need people to go do that. But these are really hard places and that money is limited. So like, if you had a budget and someone's like, you know, Mike, I'm going to give you $10 million for the rest of your working life to work, where do you want to spend money like that? Like, where's it going to be valuable to you? Like if budget is like a reasonable budget is no obstacle, where would you want to go? What would you want to do?
I'm still on this mission with this black cockatoo at the moment. And so now when I left Kangaroo Island 3 years ago now, and I'm living on the east coast of Australia. And so we've got the same bird here. It's a different subspecies, but I can see now that it's actually in trouble as well. So it got listed as a vulnerable species, but I can see now, because I've worked across its range in 2 states over here, that it needs help. And so like I'm on this mission now to get different government entities and private entities to help figure out what the threats are first. So that's this year I've been going around trying to locate nests. So they nest in big old growth hollow bearing trees. So with a tree cavity in there, that's what they use as their nest. And there's a bit of a lack of those in most places because a lot of the forests over here in Eastern Australia have been logged in the past. So you don't see the big old growth trees like you used to. With the black cockies, they need those hollows, plus so many other species over here need hollows to live in. So I think that's where I would put my efforts in the next like 5-10 years, is like trying to figure out what's going on and then figuring out what we can do to help. On Kangaroo Island, what we did was we figured out that it was this common brush-tailed possum which on Kangaroo Island, because it doesn't have a predator, is way overabundant, and they help themselves to the one egg that the black cockatoo lays every year, and or the nestling. They'll just eat the little chick in there. So what we've done down there was every time we find a new nest tree, we just put this protective collar around the trunk so the possums can't climb past. And I think I'm starting to realize that over here on the East Coast, not only possums are a threat, but now they've got these big lace monitors that I've already documented that on camera where it's just gone up and forced the female off the egg and just eaten it. And so they're pretty common. They're out in the warm weather. They're really good predators. They're amazing actually at what they do, but they climb trees and help themselves to birds, chicks and eggs all the time. So if I can keep them out
too.
and they've got plenty of other things to eat besides my threatened black cockatoo. So yeah, that's my mission.
And would you go to work on something like that? Or I've got a friend who's out in the outback somewhere, and he's trying to help the indigenous population out there, get a little more protection. How powerful is a voice when you're trying to, like, hey, we need to make these changes or whatever it is? Can someone work on how do we fast hollow a tree or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
How hard is that communicate? Because you want to stay in the field, but if you stay in the field, then no one knows who the hell you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I need the higher ups out there to agree with me and get on board. And I think that's happening, though. It is happening slowly but surely. And it's about making those connections and stuff and getting the word out, like you say.
Would you say that that's like the most difficult part of the work that you do?
It is. It's frustrating sometimes that it's like I know what I know, but how do I get other people to understand and agree with what I know? That's the trick. Because there's and I understand I got to be realistic. There's a lot of other things out there that need money and attention as well. So, I got my agenda for this one thing, but there's competition for doing that work with everything else that's happening out there. So that's okay though. I'm willing to battle with that.
Yeah, we've found this, in my work as well. I think it's not only, you got to get those people that have the power and the ability to make things happen. You have to get them involved, and you have to continually educate them and tell them what's happening, and in a way that's, not activist like, but it's just science like. And then I think from my perspective in my career, the frustrating thing is all of a sudden, like, those people are then onto something else. They go from like a local county supervisor, and then they end up in the state, and then they end up doing, but they're the revolving door of these people in the government and elected officials, where you sometimes have to start over again and again and again, and you're trying to really stay ahead of that curve, but it's a lot of work. Because some of them are just they're there for 4 years and they're gone, like, and
getting them out there and showing them what you're actually doing and getting them involved, like you said. Like, well, we used to do that on Kangaroo Island. I would put numbered leg bands on some of the black cockatoo nestlings, and we would get supporters and property owners. So like if it was on private property, we would invite them out when we did the banding, so they get to see and maybe even hold like a little nestling in their hand, and that kind of thing really sticks with people. They don't forget that.
Yeah.
So if you can get them physically out there involved in what you're doing. I think that goes a long way, rather than just, like meetings and stuff and documents back and forth and emails. That's fine. That needs to be done too. But getting them out there on the ground, like, it makes a massive difference.
Well, you give them an experience that they won't get, that changes their perception of what's happening, and they become advocates for it.
Yeah, I remember one time on the Condor program, we had just released, I don't know, a batch of like 6 young birds, and we had these. I was kind of hidden on the ridge, where I thought I was hidden off the track, and I was sitting there with a bigger spotting scope on a tripod, kind of off in the bushes off the walking trail, and this man comes along behind me, and he was startled that he all of a sudden notices someone off the side of the trail. He's like, "Hey, whoa, what are you doing?" And I told him, I'm just like, "Oh, I'm just watching these condors that we've released last week." And then he went on this rant about what a waste of time and money, on this bird, and like all this stuff. And he was going on and on about like how we should have just let him go extinct and all these things. And then I just let him have his rant. And then at the end of, when he kind of settled down a little bit, I said, "Oh, well, would you like to at least see where your money went?" And also, I had this thing that I used to say back to people, that like, I remember we calculated like how much money of your taxes would actually per year go, like the average American, go to the Condor program. It'd be like, I don't know, like a fraction of a cent, like, and so,
right.
And so, like, compared to other things, like, it was just, ridiculously a small drop in the bucket. And so I was like, would you like to at least see, where your money's going? And so,
where your fraction of cent went.
Yeah, he comes down and he looks through my scope at this condor that was sitting there, like, sunning itself on this rock spire, in this magical place. And then he was mesmerized, and he couldn't stop watching. And he was like, "Whoa!" He's like, "Oh," he's like, I think, "Now I think I understand." Like, I totally converted him just by like offering him like to have a look, and he was just, okay. He's like, "Okay, sorry about what I said, because like now I think it's actually they're pretty cool."
What about the academic publishing side too? Because that's another form of communication that your guys in your field you have to do. Then you fly to whatever, Dallas, Texas for the annual one, and then there's 12 people, to listen to your presentation, and they're like, "Ah, shit, I'm in the wrong room." It is so hard to publish anything out academically, but it's essential so that they can learn that the possum and the lace monitor, that's how we teach the academics what's going on, because that stuff has to work all around the world with similar lessons.
Yeah, it's true. And I've been involved in heaps of scientific papers that lots on this glossy black cockatoo as well, that we cranked out from the work on Kangaroo Island that I was doing. And we experienced the massive 2019-20 bushfires there, which it basically wiped out half of all the nesting habitat and half of the feeding habitat on the island. Yeah. And I witnessed that and had to go around and document everything that we lost. It was hard to deal with, after like we're doing like 10 years of solid work, to see that up close and personal. Those were categorized as a catastrophic fire event, which means is like the highest category you can get. So it was like 90-degree heat with like 80 kilometer per hour winds. And so there was no stopping it. It just burnt from the north coast all the way across the island to the south coast. And then and then the wind changed and turned and then swept across all the way halfway across the island. Yeah, it was
Jeez.
something else. Like but you know what? The birds, surprisingly, were way more resilient than everyone gave them credit for. We basically really didn't lose any. So they attempted to nest straight afterwards, and we had one of the best nesting seasons we ever saw, and we had the highest island-wide count of the birds later that year, which surprised everyone, including me. But yeah, it was. We're still trying to, I guess, they're still monitoring the after effects there, because we think, there's probably going to be a lag effect, losing so much of their feeding habitat. They're super specialized, so they only eat the seeds off of like one species of tree. Yeah, so they've evolved for millions of years and have selected for this like one type of tree with these little cones and plucking these seeds out. And so if they don't have those, they're gone. And so that was the problem there, that the fire took out a huge area of where those trees existed. And that's happened over here in the eastern states too. So
yeah,
but it's amazing how they can adapt. They're long-lived. They learn from their parents, kind of like the condors did, and so they learn their patterns early on in life, and they're able to actually change and adapt depending on the conditions. Yeah.
Interesting. Hey, I want to wrap this up because we've been at this for a little more than an hour. So, Dave, I'm going to give you a chance to say what you want to say before we close out.
Well, as you know, Pete, we've been trying to bring in people doing ecology from around the world and doing a lot of different things. And I feel great that, people get a chance to hear some of this stuff and some of the work that people are doing. A lot of times, especially these days, it's like, oh, the environmental stuff, and people have a kind of a sour taste on that. And really, if they got into it and they understood what was happening, I think they would have a different perspective. So I want to thank Mike for coming on. Him and I have been friends for a very, very long time. And we both kind of do very similar work. So it's nice to chat. And by the way, I'm coming to see you, as you know.
Oh, I can't wait, buddy. I can't wait.
We're bringing a whole slew.
A whole slew of people. And then Mike, Mike's yours. Wrap us up. What do you want to close with? And then we'll just do another one of these whenever we feel like it's, to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I'm honored to be on here, Pete, and thanks, Dave. Yeah, it was, I think, good conversation there, and just like we covered all kinds of different topics. But yeah, I just want to, I guess, say, like, I hope Americans aren't scared of Australia, because it's really not that scary over here. Australia gets a bad rap for all these things, the deadliest place and everything, but it's no deadlier than going out into the the forests in America. Like at least here I can walk around and there's no like giant predator about to tackle me. So yeah, anyway, come to Australia.
There you go. Come to Australia. All right, stand by. I'll be right back to you guys.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank